Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our second session of our new Running a Practice series, The Climate Forward Firm, Sustainable Architecture and Practice. As you get settled, please feel free to say hello and where you're joining from in the chat. To qualify for continuing education credit, AIA California provides learning objectives for every webinar and includes them in the presentation that can be made available online. Given today's webinar and our learning objectives, we'd like to get a better sense of our audience today and your firm's relationship with sustainability. Please take a moment to respond to the poll that will be on your screen in 1 second. Awesome. So that should be launched on your guys' screens. And while you are responding to the poll, we'll go through some housekeeping reminders. Today's session is being recorded and qualifies for one AIA HSW learning unit. For those who stay on and watch live, AIA California staff will report these units to AIA for you and will send follow-up information on how you can receive a certificate of completion. There will be a Q&A session towards the end of today's program, so please, if you have questions, drop them into the Q&A box. Please be constructive in your comments and questions to help foster a positive learning experience for everyone. I'd now like to introduce our moderators for today. Keith Hempel, FAIA, is a co-moderator for today's program. In his dual role as President and Chief Design Officer, Keith guides the firm's integrated design processes, which connects building performance and design excellence on every project. He serves on the AIA National's 2030 Commitment Working Group, and he is also a member of AIA National Large Firm Roundtable Sustainability Working Group, which is focused on sharing knowledge and developing resources for firms across the US. Keith is also currently serving as AIA California's Climate Action Education Subcommittee Chair. Ismar Enriquez, AIA, has been practicing for almost 2 decades and is currently a design lead and project manager at Practice. As a sustainability leader in California, Ismar addresses issues related to carbon neutrality, resiliency, climate justice, housing, and equity, and is involved in government policy change and advocacy efforts across the state. Ismar is currently serving as the AIA Climate Action Education Subcommittee Vice Chair. And I will now hand it over to Ismar. Thank you guys so much.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers for today's session. First, I'll start with Chris Halstern, AIA. He is the Living Building Challenge Service Director, Senior Architect, and Author with the Miller Hall Partnership in the San Diego and Seattle offices, with a variety of project experience, including 7 certified living buildings and more on the way. His book, Living Building Education, chronicles the story behind his first living building, the Berkshire School. A Living Future accredited profession and a Living Building Challenge hero, Chris is a university guest lecturer and speaker at numerous conferences across the country, and he works on environmental policy at all levels of government as part of the American Institute of Architects Committee on Climate Action and Design Excellence, AIA Washington, and a board member of ShiftZero. As an affiliate instructor with the University of Washington, Chris teaches a graduate sustainability course for the College of Built Environments. Chris is also a recipient of the AIA's Young Architects Award. Next is Gwen Fortes, AIA Lead AP, BD+C. She's a senior associate at LMS Architects, a San Francisco-based firm. She leads the firm's efforts to achieve high-performance, low-carbon designs and has spoken at a number of regional and national conferences, including Greenbuild, AIA National, and the AIA California Monterey Design Conference. Gwen has also held a lecturer position in architecture, buildings, and performance at both California College of the Arts and UC Berkeley. And next is Carlos Augusto Garcia, AIA. He's also a recipient of the 2025 AIA National Young Architects Award. Carlos is a civic advocate and a leading voice on decarbonization. As an associate principal and studio director at Brooks Scarpa, he champions sustainability strategies and the design of resilient housing and master planning projects. He helps shape climate policy through AIA at the national, state, and local levels, while also working with the standard organizations like ICC and ASHRAE on developing international standards. His passion for climate action was forged during the post-Katrina rebuilding efforts, and he joins the panel to share actionable strategies for embedding climate action into architectural practice. So please help me welcome our speakers. Thank you so much for taking your time and for your generosity. And now I'd like to hand it off to Chris so he can start to share the screen and start this amazing presentation. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks so much, Ismar. Really quick before we go to Chris, I wanted to share the results of the poll. We're going to end the poll and then share those results so we all get a better sense of who's in the audience today. Can you guys see that? Okay, great. Yeah, it looks like majority here are small firms. I actually don't get to see the short answer responses for some of these. Most folks don't have a sustainability action plan. Most folks are not a 2030 commitment signatory. And I'm looking at some of these other responses that we can share. Yeah, it looks like folks are learning and starting some of their sustainability journeys. I can share some of these responses as well. So thank you guys all so much. And now we can hand it over to Chris.
Thanks. I think once your screen share stops, I'll be able to share mine. There we go. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Have a few topics to get into, so we'll try to get right to it here. Hopefully that screen share is working. Can I get a nod from somebody? I'm seeing Keith. Thank you. Okay, so a little bit about Miller Hull first. We are about the size of 86, so we're not huge, but bigger than some of the small firms here. We have an office in Seattle and San Diego. Both of them are Living Building Challenge certified projects. We're also a member of JUST organizations and have a JUST label. If you don't know about those yet, it's a social justice framework that's really helpful to have your firm operating. And so I encourage you to take a look into it. We get to really practice in almost all types of architecture. We do basically everything except for healthcare services. We even do healthcare education, but just not hospitals or outpatient type of buildings. We do get to work all around the world as well. A lot of our projects overseas are with the embassies for the United States as well, but really kind of focused here in the Northwest. I wanted to start briefly, especially after seeing those poll results, kind of talking a bit about what's important to set up for your sustainability values in the firm. And I'll show you that in a couple different ways. First of all, the idea here that it's part of our core values. You can see that calling out the specific terminology, I think, is really critical in just how the firm operates. So make sure that you have something like that included in how your firm views its practice overall. Secondly to that, I think it's also important to have sustainability values that are much more specific for that. So I won't read out these, but you can see, again, it's important, I think, to have these key words that are flagged as part of your firm's sustainability work. That really helps kind of set the direction. One of the things for us that was really critical is that we realized that we also needed to embody some of these principles that we were asking our clients to do. So we've tried to really reflect that in our own work, in the commitments we make, and even just our own firm operations, which we'll see. All that kind of comes together in a sustainability action plan, which again, I saw some of you do have and some don't. I encourage you to really get those put together. And you can use the AIA's resources for that. They've just recently put out some really great documents showing how to build a sustainability action plan that covers a lot of really valuable components to it. So for us, you can see for design work, again, I won't read each of these, but you can see the things that are highlighted are really quite progressive here, and that's important too. We know we don't get here on every project, but that's okay. The idea that we're talking about these components with every client, that we're investigating them on every project is really important, because then you will actually achieve these things on certain projects. So having these goals stated is really critical to kind of setting up the framework overall for your work. Again, kind of just looking at going beyond design, but maybe a bit more how we practice, having keywords in there, transparency about how we do our work, how we share with the rest of the industry, social and environmental justice components, and even advocacy, which we'll all talk about here in just a moment. A commitment to transparency is really important to the firm. So everything you see today that I'll show you, plus more, is really included on our website. And we really have all of this information available to you all to look at. We encourage people to comment to us about it, to help us improve it, to use the work and share it as much as it'll help you as well, because that's how we all get better together. So one of the things you'll see on our website is our tracking of 2030 commitments. Like many of you were part of this as well. You can see here to kind of just orient you. This is where we are, the far right side of the graph. We haven't quite hit the target yet in the last few years. Overall, kind of trending better, but you can see we need to also report the times when we aren't really successful, because this helps us all know how to get better too. The materials pledge is another one we want to highlight. This is something new. It's been out for a couple years now. If you haven't participated in this, we encourage you to do that as well. And you can see our reporting around materials has really increased over the last year. It took some effort to provide information around these projects, but we really found it was helpful, not only to us, but also we hope to the industry as well, as this continues to increase and help others in the practice begin to extend their materials work. And then we also report all of our information for how our firm operates. That stays publicly on our website as well. And all this work and effort, these commitments that we've put together here, the Sustainability Action Plan has resulted in where we're at now with 9 living buildings. We're quite fortunate to be in that space. And you can see those, if you know the Living Building Challenge, that really aligns with a lot of the Sustainability Action Plan language that we've talked about already, really kind of achieving those net positive results, those 0 carbon emissions as we're moving towards those types of buildings, integrating social justice and those considerations as well. And for those of you that don't have sustainability action plans yet, or even if we do, I like to remind people about this because I think this is really important in our industry. A real help for us that we can rely on is the AIA Code of Ethics. Really talks about specific requirements that we have as practitioners to deal with specific ecosystems, to talk to our clients specifically about environmental efforts, and dealing with things like energy conservation and materials. So our own professional organization really supports our work in this. And so for people that may not be on the bandwagon of sustainability yet, this is what you can use to help kind of move them there and rely on for support for us. Now let's take a quick look at how we operate here internally at Miller Hull. We're fortunate for this size of firm to have 3 sustainability directors, and we try to touch every project within the firm. We each have a little bit different expertise, but we all work together to really implement these policies within all the projects and then help the firm's operations run as well. With that, we have a group of our internal sustainability group called EcoOps, is a number of members with that. And these are leaders on each project that we have that interact with sustainability and that are more full-time on their projects individually. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute too, and I'll show you how we've moved to that model. I also wanted to touch on how we establish project goals because people often ask about that. And this is what works for us. Is certainly at the beginning, it helps to have guidelines when you're trying to choose which clients to pursue, which projects to go after. And so having these values that we've already looked at is really critical to your firm making these go or no-go decisions on projects. If you have that ability, you can kind of tailor your work towards clients that are going to align with your values. That's really helpful. We really try to first use client sustainability goals. Certainly all of us working in California and the West Coast, a lot of the clients, certainly public clients, have great sustainability goals already. So relying on those as kind of a base foundation. Codes and laws, again, on these progressive West Coast projects, we get to rely on various legislative and codes that really set us up to be moving in the right direction already in sustainability. So those are helpful. Then at kind of towards the end of those things, we find out what certification system might fit their values. So we don't try to put people into a specific certification system for LEED or living building. We try to see how these things above have really tailored and fit a certification system that'll allow those values to be kept throughout the project and avoid VE, hopefully. We also talk about risk avoidance for clients. Certainly developers like this kind of thinking as we're looking for any future regulations that may be coming out, any work with insurance and things like that, as we're trying to make sure that they're covered for their future building. And finally, then we overlay our firm goals if we haven't already hit them in one of these other categories. So let's look just briefly here at carbon, for example, in our projects and our work. I don't know if you've seen this before, but Jason McLennan, the guy who invented the Living Building Challenge, he's got this great philosophy, the 3/4 baked that he talks about. We subscribe to this here too in the firm, and you'll see that here a bit with some of the things that we're putting out with our sustainability work. We may not have it completely figured out, but we try to get it out there. We try to put these things in projects and into practice, and we find that to be a really valuable way to start too. So I encourage you to kind of take that leap sometimes. This is one of those for us. Just in the embodied carbon side, we have a 40% reduction for all of our projects. That's a target we're trying to hit. We can't necessarily hit those on every project, but we are certainly getting close. We have projects that have achieved that and better. So again, setting these goals really helps you kind of get there. Same with our maximum overall building embodied carbon targets too. So this just helps us look at it across our portfolio, especially when we're considering different project types. When we do a small library made out of timber, it's much easier to hit these numbers than when we're doing a giant embassy with a lot of security components overseas. But this helps us talk about that and be able to set targets. For us specifically, we've really developed our embodied carbon lab within our own firms quite a bit. You can see these numbers up here, about 163 buildings that we've run through. And the key to doing this is really upscaling a lot of our employees to be able to do tally runs, to be able to do these embodied carbon analyses work. So 45 or so employees that we've been able to do that. A lot of that was done during COVID time. We tried to capitalize on that downtime a bit to help upskill some people. And I want to talk to you briefly about this program that we've created here called Emission Zero that really relates to the sustainability values we've talked about, but also the embodied carbon work we have. We really see this as an initiative to target the elimination of greenhouse gases in all the projects that we do. And it has these 4 prongs here that are really critical. I'll briefly touch on here. So there's a design component, making sure that we're designing towards these standards. First of all, reducing embodied carbon in our design work as much as we can. We have an educate component that's for ourselves, for the industry, for our clients. Advocate's a really critical piece as well as we look to move towards helping get codes and laws passed that support reduced emissions. And finally, the offset piece. This doesn't work without the other 3 either, is that we know we can't build carbon neutral projects right now, and that's okay. So we do the other 3 things first, but then we also are taking responsibility for the projects we do build, and we're offsetting the embodied carbon from everything that gets built from our portfolio every year. And you can see since 2021, this has brought about 45,000 tons of offset so far as we continue to develop this program. I want to show you some challenges. We'll talk about a few just brief ones so you can see a little bit behind the scenes. This is not all perfect work. It's not things that we're successful at all the time. So it's important to talk about that too. One of the things I mentioned earlier was how we have these sustainability champions that are part of each project, these leads on all of them. What we used to do was have these check-ins with every project periodically through almost every phase of design. We found that to really become too cumbersome for project teams. It was too much to try to organize this and maintain it with all the other things that has to happen during a project. So we've moved to this different model now where we have this sustainability leads on every project. And we, as kind of the eco-ops leaders, the sustainability directors, we work closely with them to make sure they're getting their questions answered and they're on track to kind of following what they need to meet all these goals we've talked about in each project. Also want to mention things we've tried to, like these wheels. We've tried to create ways that we can monitor different project performance from energy, water, and materials. So this has taken a lot of effort internally to say, how are we going to track this on every project and then easily convey all this complicated sustainability performance information to people? And so this was our attempt at doing that. And I can say this is probably not as successful as we had wanted it to be. So again, just another place where we've been trying to innovate here and track our own internal progress. And finally, this is kind of an interesting one that we are in some ways fortunate to have. This idea that people that are at Miller Hull, they often think, well, because I work here, my work is already sustainable and I don't have to do very much. And then even if you ask our friends over at Artificial Intelligence here kind of about Miller Hull, we get a kind of a great review here, and that's wonderful. It's humbling. You see that it's foundational part sustainability, and it's in all aspects. Okay, well, that's a lot to put on us. So we have that as an idea, but really to be able to do this is something we all always have to work at on all of our projects. And this is where we do fall down, certainly. So making sure that all staff feels that they're empowered to reach out to the right people, that they're able to investigate sustainability on their projects and really spend some time to be able to incorporate this level of performance on the projects is a challenge. That's something we're continuing to navigate. And just briefly here towards the end is just some fun things that we've tried recently is we've been putting up these posters that we've created around the office, really just a connection to the idea that design is sustainability and trying to get people invested in different ways about talking about energy, to operational carbon, and to other projects and glazing requirements on buildings, all these things to just get people engaged. So this is something that we've started recently within the firm too. And we encourage you to try some things out like that if it works with your culture. And the last two things I'll touch on are some tools we love. That was something we wanted to talk about in this session as well. This is a fairly new one. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Carbon Leadership Forum and all their great work around embodied carbon, but they've recently just launched this Benchmark Explorer tool where you can now start to see where projects stack up in terms of their building type, and it'll help you start to set embodied carbon targets for your projects as well. And then one that I really love too is making sure to still talk about our chemicals of concern work. And if you haven't seen this yet from Habitable, formerly the Healthy Building Network, they now have this tool called Informed, where you can go in and see these different product categories, and it very easily outlines for you good, better, best kind of color charts here in what's a good products to avoid chemicals of concern in. So those of you trying to achieve red list or similar goals, or even just improve indoor air quality, this is really helpful. So that's it for me. Just leaving you with the idea that you should do some kind of action. Make sure to take some action. There's a lot of things that you can plug into on your firms, whether you're small or large. And so that's my question to you is, what will you do to advance sustainability in your practice? Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I think I'm up next, so I'm going to go ahead and share screen and introduce myself again. Get this up. Okay, so I'm Gwen. Thank you so much, Chris. That was amazing. A lot of great ideas, and I think some themes will carry through in my share as well. I'm with Letty Madam Stacy Architects. We're a 35-person firm or so in San Francisco. We've been working in the Bay Area and the bigger kind of Northern California region for several decades. And I kind of want to pause and just talk about sort of the reason I came to the firm and, the founding principals, Bill, Marcia, and Richard here in the center, kind of founded the firm on the principle of kind of, we're doing sustainable design. We're really serious about it. And that's kind of why a lot of us were drawn to the firm. And Chris's note about kind of like, well, the firm's identity is so aligned with sustainability, we're probably already just doing it anyway, is a good reminder that, we have to keep working at it, that the industry is shifting. There's still so much to learn. And so that's what we're really trying to do here. But I don't take it for granted that it's special to have a firm like that. And it is kind of really important to have those values seated, if you can, from the top down, because you see also from the bottom up a lot of young architects and designers coming in and really clamoring for that type of value-driven work. So I really appreciate working with this amazing team of people, and I'm happy to share a little bit about kind of how we're striving to perform and improve as well. Our typologies are a little bit unique, maybe. We have been focusing on mission-driven design for pretty much exclusively for the last several decades. And what that means to us is that we are looking at housing and specifically affordable and supportive housing. We look at education. We work with education clients, be it K through 12 and higher ed and some pre-K spaces. And then we also work on community-facing projects, so working with cities and parks on, community centers and libraries and rec centers and things like that. And what all three of these kind of share in common is that they have pretty tight budgets. So it's often a stretch to kind of try to convince clients maybe to kind of go the extra mile. But I want to kind of center a little bit on that question, kind of why do we push this? How do we push this with our clients when everything is so constrained? And, I don't think any of us in the room, if you're attending this session, you don't need to be convinced that climate is an issue. It's an urgent problem. We've seen that emissions graph a million times. I don't need to show that again. But yeah, what makes us go beyond code minimum for those types of clients that might be resistant to it or might be kind of more comfortable doing the bare minimum? And in some cases, you can say, well, it might save you money. You could save on operational energy costs. Like this could be a good long-term solution for you. You can also convince a client like, well, this will be a differentiator for you. You know, you'll stand apart from your peers. Um, and sometimes those arguments can work, but ultimately, I think we are all here because this is a moral motive. Like we are here because we care about these issues. It's the right thing to do, and our firm is taking this seriously. And like I said, we're a little bit self-selected in that we kind of came to the firm for those same values, but we try to reinforce them, and it takes work to reinforce those values. And I want to talk about that, how we do that through our internal pinups. We do kind of an annual state of the firm report where we think about how we're doing on our goals towards climate action. We take our message out to the street, to climate marches. You know, this is really embedded in everything that we're doing and we're thinking, and it's good to kind of reinforce. So I know we're not the only firms, we're not alone in this. And also the whole community around us is holding us up, and holding us accountable to kind of create those goals and strive to meet them. And just one other quote from Kathleen Dean Moore before I get into our firm is that it is really an opportunity to kind of look within, and think about, what do we want to be as architects? How do we want to perform in this space? How can we stretch whatever we're doing on a daily basis to try to think through the climate crisis and what we're doing towards solving it? So it's something that I think we should not just wait for our firms to kind of figure out the systems, or wait for the tool to come around. It's kind of on us today to start to think about this and really transform our practices. But with that, I do have some ideas about how we have started looking at our firm and creating systems and practices that might align with what you're up to. And so I kind of break it up into four bundles of categories, starting with reporting programs. Chris touched a little bit about this. I want to talk about mentorship. I also want to talk about how we use the space in our office, to make the climate goals kind of legible and visual. And I also want to bring it back to how we're connecting to the movement, outside of the firm. So yeah, to start with our reporting programs, we have also been reporting with the 2030 commitment for 14 years. And so I know there's a lot of folks on the call that are not reporting, or they haven't signed on to the commitment. It's not too late to start. It's really, truly, you know, look at if you have some hours within the next few weeks, try to take the momentum from this webinar and put it to action and see what it takes to sign on to this commitment. It is super valuable. And I'll get into a little bit of that in the next few slides. We also are kind of babies into the materials pledge, that Chris mentioned as well. It's a newer program, and we are in the second year of reporting, and we're kind of like clumsily getting our footing, but it's actually shown a lot of value already. So I would love to recommend that as well. Then there's other kind of ways of how these programs can help, I guess, bolster the climate action motivation. The JUST label has a lot of alignment with kind of looking inward and kind of making sure that our values are aligned with our work. The Design for Freedom program, if you're not familiar, is a really great window into kind of labor practices and how we screen our materials. And we've actually tested this out on a few projects in a deep way. And we're excited to kind of take that forward. And then like a really fun, annual tradition is to do an informal kind of carbon footprint challenge where we all kind of put our carbon footprint into a calculator and learn a little bit about how our behavior over the last year influenced our carbon footprint. And we have some kind of silly awards for that. But it's really about education. It's really about kind of thinking about how, not necessarily guilting us into making different decisions. It's really about kind of connecting our work, our routines to kind of the bigger climate issues at hand. But back to the top of the list, the 2030 commitment. So I would love, if anything else happens, like if we get 2 people on this call to sign on at the end of this webinar, I feel like we'll have a success. So let me break this down a little bit for you. We have been charting our performance over, again, like I said, 14 years or so. This graph is looking not at the percent reduction value that you have a baseline and then you have your EUI and you kind of track from 60 to 70 to 80% reduction from that baseline. We are now kind of flipping the script. What we learned from this program is that the baselines were driving us crazy and none of us agreed on how to set one. So we're actually trying to make sure that we're like looking at true EUI energy use of our buildings without looking at a percentage reduction. And what do we learn there? We're all trying to go to zero at the end of the day. We're trying to get to net zero. So it's at this stage where 80% reductions starts to lose its meaning, that we thought that we would open this up to a little bit more of a holistic view of the true energy use of the building. So what we have here is every dot represents a project in our portfolio. The orange dots are housing projects. The pink ones are community-based projects, and then the green ones are education. And what this taught us is that actually the previous way we had been thinking about energy use and learning about the percent reduction is that our education projects at the time looked really good. They had the biggest percent reduction, and that was because the baselines were a lot higher. But in fact, our community projects tend to be like the highest performance, which was a big surprise, actually. These are usually publicly funded projects with not a lot of funds to kind of go above and beyond. But at the end of the day, it does seem like there's a big demand for that. And the typologies that we were working with are really well suited to that. So that was a great finding. And we also have been noticing kind of a stagnation of our housing projects. So we are looking at this cluster of orange dots across the 20s and 30s EUI range. And that doesn't seem to be lowering, but that's not necessarily something that is going to be a big issue to us. We already kind of know the constraints of our housing projects. They're usually urban infill projects with very limited kind of roof space left over. They're mid-rise or sometimes high-rise projects. So it's kind of hard to get it to calc out to get to net zero. And that kind of opens up these questions, right? Like, so we're looking at 2030s coming soon. How are we going to get to zero? Well, maybe this is about kind of the bigger issue. Like, let's look at all electric. How are we doing on those goals? How are we looking at offsets? Is that a conversation we're ready to have with our clients? Are they ready to have? How are these projects actually serving the community in other ways that don't just talk about energy? So it's a great conversation starter and a way to kind of open up the dialogue and get people thinking about how to do better. It's also brought up kind of questions about how we do the work. So we've been doing this for 14 years, like I said, but we haven't been always doing energy models in-house. We're a small firm. We don't have the tools or the time really to do energy models ourselves. So often we would be relying on our Title 24 models, our compliance models, which are not, as we all know, the best way of kind of predicting energy use. And so these pie charts are showing the light green is the Title 24 projects that were modeled in our office. And the darker green is like the performance models, quote unquote, ASHRAE performance models that do kind of a better job at estimating performance. And just to kind of start tracking, like what are we getting out of the data? And is this data even valuable? Is this working for us? And what we've seen is over the years from 2020 through to 2024, like we've actually gotten a bigger chunk of our projects going the further distance and opting into the higher quality energy model, which is great because we know that means that we're getting the better feedback, more valuable feedback. Usually we're getting it earlier. Usually we're able to kind of make design decisions that optimize based on the outputs of these tools. So I think that this is a really great finding, and I hope to see one day a totally solid green chart in the future. Where we are already solid, and I'm happy to say this, is that we have been tracking our all-electric performance. And this is all, again, because of the 2030 commitment. So because we're doing this reporting, we're collecting this data from all of our projects, and we can now use it to make, answer the questions that we want to answer. So this is looking from 2020 up to 2024, like how many projects in our portfolio per square foot were all electric. And we've really gotten to 100% faster than I actually imagined. But it's a really great sign that we are taking this seriously. It helps that a lot of legislation and kind of jurisdictions and clients are also on board with it. It doesn't seem to be as big of a lift to ask this question anymore, and technology is becoming more competitive. So this is, a great sign. So it's kind of, now that we're here, it's kind of, how can we also build on top of this? What other questions should we be asking? Where should we be pushing with our clients, since we've arrived, it seems, in a good spot for all electric design efforts. Okay, and then I wanted to talk too about our mentorship really briefly. So on top of reporting and kind of collecting the data and sharing it back with a firm, we do try to have more kind of informal office events that involve talking about climate and thinking about performance together. So we have instituted a office-wide design pinup every month. Maybe one or two projects would pin up, and we kind of rotate talking about where they're at in design. Often these types of questions about climate and carbon come up, and this is encouraged. We also have smaller group reviews of every project with the principal group. And so there's like an hour once a month, and a project or two will kind of go and get really focused design feedback. And a lot of those questions also are, focused on design as well as performance. All these things are connected, all these things are together. We also have a sustainability committee, and we meet once a month to think about what we need to do as a firm. It's kind of very grassrootsy. Everybody can bring their own ideas, and it's all about kind of championing that awareness of climate action and the tools that we're coming around. And we're kind of beta testing on behalf of the firm a little bit here and there before we suggest that it's rolled out to the firm. And then, yeah, just to say that, like, again, we're a smaller firm, so we don't have like a focused like expert on staff, or we don't have teams that are big enough to necessarily have like someone to do the model, the tally model on every project. So it really is about kind of like trying to make sure everybody in the firm is educated and up to speed on all of the tools, and the committee work can help with that. Another kind of tip I would have for you is if you have an office space that is regularly occupied, and I know some people are hybrid these days, but even, if you're in the office like a few days a week, I encourage folks to like use your walls and pin up your climate data in the office, like year round. And what we've done, and this is kind of a work in progress, is we've created like a 11 by 17 template within everybody's kind of pinup space. So every project has like a pinup board, and everybody is expected to have this 11 by 17 sheet that shows your 2030 goals, where you're at on your targets. Also embodied carbon. This was a big change last year, where we're all now kind of able to quickly make some embodied carbon estimates, thanks to some new tools that are out there, as well as the framework for design excellence, and getting people to think through not just carbon, not just energy, but all of the different kind of strategies in the framework for design excellence. And so this is just a few photos of like a few projects on the wall, and you can see on the bottom right corner of both of these spreads is this little data metric centric pinup. And I'm going to zoom into one in a second, but you can kind of see it's in the context of like everything about the design. We're communicating the diagram, we're communicating the renderings. We're also communicating like where it stands on carbon and performance and otherwise. And so this is one example where we have on the left side, it's looking at where you're at in your 2030 commitment compared to the baseline. Are you all electric? This is kind of looking at operational carbon. And then on the right, we have embodied carbon. And this is, again, kind of the new piece of the template that I think the firm is still ramping up on kind of the education of what these numbers mean and how, like, is this a good number or a bad number? The CLF benchmarks are really helpful to kind of get a sense of what's normal or not. We are still tweaking with the template a little bit here and there, but I think it's going to be really helpful when we go through for 2030 reporting for embodied carbon, and I'm going to be able to kind of like just look at the wall and see where people are at. So highly recommend finding a template. You can totally borrow this, take it with you, or a version of your own that makes sense for your firm to like make it visual, because otherwise sometimes these numbers just like live on your server and no one knows. But this way it's like a visual, it's all standardized, and it's also like a way to maybe promote a little competition within the firm. And then also the framework for design excellence. This can feel a little bit daunting. If you're not familiar with the framework, there's 10 measures, and they all kind of focus on different strategies and different kind of focus areas, energy being one of them, but it does go beyond energy. It looks at resources, designing for ecology. There's a lot of different ways to enter a project, and there's so many ways to get excited about sustainability globally. And so we've created this template as well. Feel free to take it with you or adopt it. And we pin these up on the wall just to kind of make sure that every team is thinking about it. So if it's empty, it's a way to kind of say like, hey, where's your framework for design excellence? narrative. It doesn't take too much time to add a few bullet points and get the juices flowing, because sometimes that will wake you up and realize, oh, I should really ask my civil engineer, how are we doing on that stormwater idea? So it's kind of a reinforcing agent. And then finally, I think the last piece is just connecting to the movement and reminding ourselves that, you know, we're one firm, we're 35 people, we work on a few dozen projects a year, but it's going to take all of us to really move the needle on this climate challenge. So I think that it's super refreshing and important to talk to others outside of the firm, stay active with our peers. We have a great connection to community in the Bay Area, but I'm sure there's, you know, within AIA California and beyond, you always can find kind of partners in the movement. And yeah, be upfront about the successes, but also the struggles. And so I appreciated Chris's kind of candid kind of take on like, well, it's not perfect all the time, and we're still workshopping through some of this. We're still learning every day. Things are changing, and I think it's really important that we gotta stumble a little bit before we can run. It's really imperative. So yeah, connect inward, connect outward, and I hope that some of this is something that you can take back to your firms. And with that, I will hand it off to Carlos.
Awesome. Thanks, Gwen. I'm going to get my screen shared here. All right. Everybody can see this. All right. I'm not going to talk too much about data. We've had some of that happen already. Carlos, I'm with Brooks and Scarpa. I'm going to talk more about philosophy and ethos. We are relatively small by comparison. That means we don't have any dedicated staff really for anything. So certainly no dedicated sustainability staff. Most people that work at our firm have several jobs. What that translates to is we all have to kind of rely on each other. This is really an experimentation learning environment, but the advantage of being small is that you retain that kind of agility, that ability to experiment. And we actually do a lot of learning alongside our clients. This is one of our first sustainably focused projects. This is the first LEED certified affordable housing project in the United States, and this was completed in 2002. So this started in the late 90s. The technology was not sophisticated at all. Code certainly hadn't caught up yet. And a lot of this, like I said, was experimentation. We were still using, natural gas. A lot of the stormwater systems that we developed were not tested. So a lot of these things were happening very early on in the sustainability movement, but the intent there was to push our clients, to push the engineers and our contractors to start thinking about these things early on in the process. So what we're going to have is a few slides that kind of demonstrate what our kind of ethos around design are. Primarily, we prioritize climate action by formalizing these goals that you've heard Gwen and Chris both talk about. Cultural shift that's both inside and outside of the office, and then setting these kind of targets. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Everybody on this call should probably already know this, that we're responsible for 40% of energy-related carbon emissions and 50% of all extracted materials. By 2050, our building stock is going to double. So everything we do has to be focused on the impacts that we have on our climate, the inefficiencies of our current building stock, and how do we combat these sort of unhealthy buildings that are affecting our well-being and our livelihoods. We got to reduce carbon emissions at all stages of the building's life cycle. We need these strategies for upfront reduction. Embodied emissions are critical to meeting our immediate carbon reduction targets. We have to use better materials, and we have to use fewer of them. We like to set this out as an ethical mandate. Climate action is an issue of social equity. We do a lot of affordable housing, permanent supportive housing. I personally got started in post-Katrina in New Orleans and emergency management, disaster recovery, seeing this stuff on the front lines. Our vulnerable communities are hit by climate change more frequently and more severely than most others. There are going to be 4 billion people who are vulnerable to climate risks, and 91% of people worldwide live in areas with severe air pollution. But it's also good business. I think Gwen mentioned strong sustainability ethos. It attracts talent for your firm internally, but also it aligns with a lot of progressive clients, and it creates more valuable, resilient projects, which are less susceptible to climate change and these extreme weather events that we're seeing more frequently. This is a sheet from our sustainability action plan. I would encourage everyone to develop one, and that's part of the instruction you'll get with signing up for AIA 2030 and the DDX, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. We see climate action as a social responsibility too. It's not just environmental. It, like I said, disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable communities. And these are a lot of the same communities that we design for. So these kind of resilient, low carbon design is not a negotiable part of creating, in our case, equitable housing. It creates buildings with these kind of long-term value and lower operational costs for the residents as well. Something we internally focus on is really getting our staff involved with all of these organizations, specifically the ones that are sustainably focused. We're not going to know everything. We don't have the bandwidth simply to keep abreast with all of the developing technology. As Gwen mentioned, this stuff is developing really rapidly. So we really rely on our staff to be active in these other communities, even outside of traditional architecture, because a lot of these people are doing really fantastic work that we can't always keep up with, but they are developing tools and resources that we can use in our own practice. And we don't just sort of talk about this as Gwen's office does. We put this on the walls. So if anyone's ever been to our studio, you'll see all the stuff about housing, density, and sustainability for every project that goes through our office. So our staff is constantly reminded that this is the things that we focus on. And they can see the development of other projects that they're not necessarily involved in. All of this stuff is available for our clients to see, for engineers to see. So when people come in to meet with us, they understand that this is part of who we are and the type of design that we do. This has already been stated a few times, but just establishing goals is really going to create accountability. And that kind of thing it's critical to maintain that kind of inertia once you get a project started. Embodied carbon is a design choice. You can design this in or out of a project. Specifically now with the embodied carbon of our structural systems, we've really leaned on our structural engineers to kind of help us design embodied carbon out of our projects and experiment with different types of software and structural systems that I'll show you later in the presentation. And all these integrated systems can be affordable. We mentioned, I think earlier in one of the earlier presentations, the Committee on the Environment's it's founded nearly 30 years ago. It's always been driven by the belief that sustainability is a design discussion that involves integrating a number of considerations around energy, water, health, equity, community, and ecology. This is back in 1997 when COAT launched the Top 10 Awards. Hopefully most of you have heard of those. They celebrate projects that have achieved excellence in design in a more holistic way that includes all of these principles. And in 2002, COAT refined the criteria for what the top 10 measures and associated metrics were meant to address. The framework is one that decides the design process and is adapted to any firm, regardless of size or location or project type, budget, region, area of the world. The kickoff for us is key. We really establish those design criteria for sustainability really early on in the project. What is the client able to do? What can their budget afford? What do they think they can handle? Because we don't want to be recommending things that are not either of interest to the client or something that the project's not capable of achieving. But we do often develop alongside of our concept design a kind of sustainability design target that kind of remains the project's North Star from the beginning to the end. We try to rely on really, really simple, low-tech design solutions because those are much less likely to get designed out of the project if they're part of the party of the project. For instance, like shaping the massing for natural ventilation or designing high-performance building envelopes with effective shading. That kind of thing, those things are baked into the project, so it's not being applied later and then can be value engineered out. And this is where we spend a lot of time really early on in design. itself is a series of tools. It really represents a larger goal for our industry. We contribute no insignificant amount of carbon emissions in the built environment. So even signing on and doing what you can when you can is enough. It's okay not to do everything at once. Little steps are meaningful long term and in the aggregate.
2030 commitment really was the fire that started our sustainability action plan for us back in 2016. And without that, there wasn't anything distinct that showed that we were living our values and walking our walk. And that has helped us verbalize those items and those goals, and has shown our clients that's really a value that we're going to bake into every project.
AIA 2030 provides our firm tremendous value because we can start looking at the metrics of all of our projects, so our entire portfolio we can look at from year to year, and we can see if we're making progress.
But the 2030 commitment also acts as an incentive to do better, as a tracking tool, as a means of sharing data and educating everyone in our firm about what improved performance means on all projects.
So that was a quick video on the AIA 2030 commitment. Like everyone in the video said, and as co-presenters have said before, it's about making a public commitment because that helps your firm with the kind of accountability. We're not going to have, all of our reporting represent the carbon neutrality that we're trying to achieve overnight. And we might not make it by 2030, but it's these incremental steps that are going to help us all move our projects in the right direction. And I will recommend getting involved with AIA at national, state, regional, and local levels. There's plenty of tools, materials, forums, activities, and courses, kind of like this one, that will give you the tools that you need to be able to establish these sustainability action plans and 2030 goals within your own practice. As I mentioned before, low-tech tools are available, but we also are coming up against more challenges that require more robust tools. Not all of those are expensive. I know that's a concern for our firm more often than not. What is free to use? What is available to us? Early analysis doesn't always require expensive software, but the kind of proficiency and fluency in these things comes from exposure, and that kind of exposure only comes from doing. So the AIA 2030 commitment has a portal for the Design Data Exchange, which Gwen talked about a little bit before. The things that we typically hear is, oh, it takes too much time. It really only takes 20 to 30 minutes to input a project into the DDX. It doesn't cost anything for your firm to be registered. There's no penalty for not achieving the goals that you set out. It's about these incremental steps that each one of us needs to take. Making progress from project to project and year to year is more important than meeting these lofty targets. There's no green police department to enforce this. No one's going to come for you. The program is completely voluntary. Don't get hung up on the word commitment. It's more of a goal. There's also the AIA Materials Pledge, which I want to talk too much about because it's already been touched upon. But this is just a prioritization of specification of materials. We want to create a healthier, more equitable built environment. The materials are a huge part of that, specifically with embodied carbon. The framework is kind of built around these pledge statements and each one of these material selection practices across the 5 impact categories that you see here. So some of the tools that we use, like I said, most, if not all the stuff we use is either free to use or it was part of a software package that we were already paying for. What we really try to focus on is how do we leverage the stuff that we already have, because we simply don't have the resources or the staff bandwidth to constantly be vetting, new software and new pieces of paid software that we would have to buy. So AceLab is a free to use platform. Anyone can sign up. We were part of the pilot program a few years back. They basically connect manufacturers, suppliers, vendors with architects. They aggregate all the material data for you, including their EPDs. embodied carbon data, and they allow you to establish communication within their web platform for you to make connections with these vendors, so you don't have to spend your time going out and finding materials that satisfy your criteria. And then this is our sort of general firm design workflow. Like I said, we're always focused on what do we already have. So we've built some custom scripts inside of the Rhino plugins for Ladybug and Grasshopper. And then we've also started incorporating the new software that's become available from Autodesk in the way of Forma and the other plugins for Revit. What's not pictured here is the 20 other tools that we try to use unsuccessfully. And I think that's really important to note, is that not necessarily because they were not great tools, but because they weren't right for us at the time that we needed them, either our size or the project type. But there are tons of products out there that are applicable for both embodied carbon and plugins for the software that you do use. So we encourage you to explore a lot of the pieces of software that are available. What I mentioned before about passive design, I think what we're able to do now that we probably weren't able to do quite as well before was this kind of site analysis. We were able to design based on kind of good sense and intuition, the things that we have all learned in architecture school. But these types of software, and what we're looking at now is Autodesk Forma, allow us to really be more rigorous about the study this early on and simple massing and siting, so that if we can actually reduce on the front end, then we don't have to be as efficient with all of these really high-tech solutions in the back end. What I mean by that is, like, demand reduction is the best tool that we have. We can reduce loads and increase efficiency, so that our energy demand is lower than it needs to be. We only look at really high-tech active systems when we absolutely have to. I mean, obviously, we like to incorporate photovoltaics when we can. But if we can minimize the building's energy load through passive design, then that means we don't have to have all of these really high-tech fancy solutions. This allows us to use smaller, more affordable systems so that our projects that are really heavily cost burdened aren't additionally burdened by just trying to achieve these sustainability goals. We've also learned, and this is Insight, so this is another Autodesk product that lets us do a kind of top level embodied and operational carbon analysis. We've learned to be super innovative with common low carbon cheap materials. And that's only because we're able to do this kind of side by side. Well, if we use the same building form, but with a different structural system, or with a different facade material, or a different type of insulation, what does that do to our embodied carbon? It's overall helped us specify a heck of a lot less concrete, which we used to kind of default to, using more sustainable insulation, optimizing the spans of structures to be as efficient as possible. But the key is to make this a constant and conscious part of the design conversation, so that this is not an afterthought. A lot of these things are much more difficult to change later on in the process, as most of us know, than they are earlier on. So if you're able to have a sort of open book with your engineers, your consultants, and your client, to let them know that if we choose this structural system, here's the upfront cost, but here's also the upfront carbon, and you can give them a kind of side-by-side comparison. And we just want to end by saying you don't need to have a dedicated sustainability person. You don't have a dedicated sustainability department to make a difference. You can just start small, be consistent, and integrate these principles into your core design culture. That's how we, as small firms, can collectively drive really, really big change. And I'll stop there.
Great. Well, I just want to thank our panel. It's a all-star panel, and you guys are doing great things. I think what I saw from the presentations, there are steps that are the through lines through all three of the presentations: setting goals, pinning your work up, making it visual, getting involved and advocating for sustainability in your communities, looking at sustainability action plans, looking at tools like the 2030 commitment, and really being intentional about your design work. I thought it was all great. We're at time. Our panelists were working really hard to answer the questions as they popped up. So feel free to jump in there. These slides will be made available, and this was recorded. So you feel free to pass it along and share it, because our panelists did a great job. So on behalf of Ismar and myself, again, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Running a Practice webinar.
Great. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks all.